Hey, everybody, and welcome to How to Make Films and Influence People with Peter and Andrew, where we talk about our own approach to screenwriting and filmmaking, discuss great works of cinema, and blasphemously imagine how they could be remade. This week, we'll be talking about All About Eve, giving an update on our current screenplay project that you, the audience, has been contributing to, answering some questions from you. But first of all, I'm Peter, successful filmmaker, film professor, and screenwriter, and this is Andrew.
Screenwriter, filmmaker, but not a professional golfer by choice.
We wanted to just update everybody on our screenplay project. It's coming along. I think we're at a really good point. And again, we're taking a little bit of a leisurely pace with this, and that's partly by design of just what works for our schedule. This is just something we're writing, not just for fun. We'd love to see this be made or make it ourselves, but it's not that we've been hired with a strict deadline to write this. And I think it's sometimes there's a real strength in rushing to get something done because you just get it done. And sometimes there's a real benefit to taking our time with it. And this is the latter. But we do have a question from a listener. And this is from Jeremiah writing in from Des Moines, Iowa. All right, thanks. Not too many people mention where they're writing from, but Jeremiah from Des Moines. Jeremiah asks, let me see. Really like the podcast. I'm learning a lot about screenwriting. One thing I wanted to know is, do you think that taking classes in screenwriting is worth it? Do you think that it's worth it going to film school, taking a random class in it, maybe doing a group for screenwriting, or is it better off just something that you do on your own? And I think that's a great question. I think sometimes people are prone to thinking everything's better if you go the traditional education route. Sometimes people think all of that's a scam and you should just do it on your own. But I both have taken many classes and teach many classes, so I have some opinions. But Andrew, what would be your take on that?
Well, as people may know, I did not take any classes and didn't go to school for screenwriting at all. I did do a lot of writing in school, which I think was helpful. And the fact that I enjoyed writing, even though it was a different style, I liked writing papers. That was always what I was best at school and always what I enjoyed the most. And I don't know, I guess from my perspective, I didn't do it, and you still can, obviously. But I think if you enjoy writing in any way, screenwriting is just a different type of writing. It's just a different style. And so it's just learning the rules of this style of writing. And once you do that, I think if you are a good writer, you'll be able to figure it out and see if that's the type that you enjoy doing. But as far as should you, go to school for that, I don't think you have to. But there is some value to it. Obviously, you as a teacher, I mean, if you can get in your class, that'd be the best way to do it. But you're giving away all this info here for free. So maybe they don't need to. Maybe it's just listen to our podcast. But yeah, what do you think?
Well, that's a good point because, I'm very wise, but there are many people even wiser than me who are also giving away the information for free. And so there are a lot of resources out there, whether it's in books, Robert McKee's story or Sid Field or Save the Cat by Blake Snyder. These are books that a lot of people in screenwriting have read, and they lay out a lot of the rules and principles of screenwriting. There also are a lot of great podcasts, a lot of great videos, there's a lot that you can learn on your own. And I think that with screenwriting specifically, and we'll just talk about screenwriting because I think filmmaking is a little bit different. But just thinking of screenwriting specifically, a degree in screenwriting doesn't really count for anything. So it's not like, well, because I got a degree with a major in screenwriting, I now get to have a job in Hollywood. That's not really how it works. So I think but at the same time, it can be really valuable to take a class and you can learn a lot in a class. So I think a little bit you have to be realistic about what your goals are and about what kind of learner you are. And I think if you can gather all this information from listening to podcasts, from watching videos, from reading books, and just go and write yourself, then I don't think you need to take a class for it. I think some people really learn a lot better when they have a teacher that they can talk to, a teacher who can structure the lesson around the needs of the class and not just sort of generally, presenting information. I think so. I think that could be really valuable. I also think one of the main benefits of a class is being forced to write, being forced to examine your writing, being forced to rewrite, being forced to share your writing. And I think those things, people don't like being forced to do stuff, but in the same way that anybody can sign up for Planet Fitness, but a lot of people hire a trainer, there's a lot of value in having that kind of accountability and that person to ask questions of, and the person to sort of push you to do work that you might just not end up doing, and whether it's one person or just being in a class. So I would say that there can be a real value in that. It doesn't need to be a university class. If you're in college, I'm not sure that majoring in screenwriting or majoring in film is always the best choice. But I think taking a class while you major in something, with more, well, I don't know, you major in some biology, or you major in economics or whatever, and you take a class in screenwriting, I think that could be a great approach. I think also finding like a writer's group, maybe where you're not paying anything. You meet up at the Panera Bread every Tuesday, something like that, and you have some of that accountability and some of that feedback. I think that can do a lot of what you're trying to get out of a class. So all that said, I think a lot of the information that you would get from a class can be readily had elsewhere, but whether you will learn it and do the work without the structure of the class is something you're going to have to figure out for yourself. And I think if
Well, I
you
think, yeah.
honestly look at that, you can make a good decision. Sorry, what?
No, I was going to say, going along with that, the another benefit I would see to going to a class would be you have a network of people who are interested in the same thing at least. And that sometimes is more valuable than even the information. Just having another group of people that you can connect with and talk to with, and at least they're trying to do the same thing. And that's worth something as well.
Oh, absolutely. And if you are interested in filmmaking beyond just screenwriting, having a network of people can be hugely valuable. But screenwriting too, in terms of making connections and getting your work out there. But also, if you write a script and show it to your uncle who's never read a script before, his
Right.
opinion is not going to count for very much. And you shouldn't put too much stock in what he says, good or bad. But having your script read by multiple people who are also screenwriters, that can be very valuable information.
Hmm.
And so I think that's a benefit.
Yeah, for sure.
So Jeremiah, thanks for the question. And I think the answer is a decisive, I don't know, it's up to you. But
Decisive, maybe.
there can be a lot of value in classes. It's not all a scam. Look into it. Think about what would work for you. But don't default to assuming that that's the only way that it works. I guess that's
Right.
what I would say. All right. And before we get into our movie of the week, Andrew, what have you been watching? Seen anything good recently?
Yeah, last week we were kind of talking about how there's not many comedies being made these days. So I revisited a one of my favorite comedies, a 1994 movie called Dumb and Dumber. I'm sure people are, well, I'm not sure. I don't know if people still watch these types of movies, but this was a huge movie growing up for me. And revisiting it, I still feel that same way. I still think it's an amazing movie, and I really enjoyed it. Um, One thing about this movie, though, I think a lot of comedies they like to like this movie. You start off with the premise that there's two dumb people and they do dumb things, which is funny. It's a great premise for a comedy, and then they end up through all these different decisions, always seem to be making the wrong choice, but it just works out for them. And so they find themselves with a lot of money and doing all these funny situations. And just at every moment, they're just playing it for comedy. What's funny about this scene? It's going to be, whatever the funniest thing is that two dumb people would do, that's what we're doing in this moment. And then they do this whole movie, just laughs consistently throughout. And by the time you get to the end, it, you almost think for a minute that they're going to like force some type of like happy ending. Like a lot of movies, I think, especially in the 2000s, they would have these comedies where it like forces a message at the end. It's like, oh, we've had this great premise, we've had this great story, and now the guys are going to learn something.
Mhm.
and they're going to get some reward. You're like, I don't know. It just doesn't feel earned. And it doesn't feel like it's consistent with the characters up to that point. But in this movie, you have, I think it's a great ending for a comedy. They kind of lose everything. They're kind of walking back on a road, and then this bus comes up, and it's these girls that are doing a swimsuit contest or something, and they need two guys to help put sunscreen lotion on them or something. You're like, oh, they're gonna like pay everything off with this totally undeserved situation for them, which is funny. And the two guys are like, oh yeah, you're gonna have to go to a different town, that way. And they like totally blow the opportunity. They walk away and they're like, oh, someday we're gonna get our big break. And it's like, it's such a perfect ending because they didn't learn anything. And there's nothing in the movie to have justified them learning or growing as human beings to then create this opportunity for themselves or to go after this opportunity when it's presented. And I think that's a really strong stance for a company to take, to like just stick with it and be like, we're not giving you something else. And it's better because of it. It is so much funnier because that's the route they go. Whereas I could see other comedies saying, they're going to learn something like, oh, you know what? This is our opportunity. We should take it. Or we've made a lot of mistakes, but we've learned from them. And it just doesn't work as well, I don't think. I think that comedy is, either things work out despite you making bad choices, or you have every opportunity to grow and you just don't. And that's funny. And just stick with that. So I don't know. Have you seen this one recently?
I saw it probably in the last couple of years, and very, very funny. I liked it. I liked it better even than I remembered. I didn't. I didn't watch it when it first came out, so I've seen it a few times
Okay.
over the years. But very funny, and I think you're totally right about that. Kind of, you got to stick with a lane in terms of, is this, yeah, what kind of characters are these? What is the tone of the movie? And it really throws people off when you have a movie that's very wholesome seeming, and then there's some twist that, like, ruins it and makes it, you know something
Right.
people wouldn't want to show their kids or whatever. But I think the reverse is also true, where you have just these totally unredeemable dumb characters who, I mean, not unredeemable in an
Not
evil
unredeemable,
way,
but
but they're just
yeah.
so dumb. And to have them like learn something would really be undermining the whole point of the movie. And I
Right.
think I think Dumb and Dumber sticks the landing on that one.
Yeah.
And that's a good example of a movie doing well at what it set out to do. It doesn't mean it's the best movie ever, but
Hmm.
I think it really executes on what it was trying to do.
It's a great premise, and then it's just played out, and they don't really leave that premise of just like, we're not going to do more than we need to do with this. This is good enough on its own. We're just going to stick with this. And you
Hmm.
don't really have to. A lot of comedies kind of fizzle out, at the midpoint because they just run out of things to do with the great premise. But this one, just start to finish, consistent, lands the ending. It's a great movie.
Yep, great one, great one. Big gulps.
Yeah. So
That's
quotable. So many quotes.
so you're saying there's a chance.
Yeah.
Okay, great. I saw, and this is a great doubleheader to go into talk about all about Eve, Dumb and Dumber, and then I saw Avatar: Fire and Ash this
Ooh.
week. I took I took a couple kids, and I had seen the first two Avatar movies. This is the third. I'd seen them both in the theater, and then never again. And I think that'll be my experience with this too. And that's not even a negative. It's just like, I think Avatar stands outside of normal filmmaking. It's going to Six Flags more than it is seeing a normal movie.
Oh, yeah.
It's such a big experience. I saw it 3D IMAX screen, and the visuals. There's a giant whale battle, whales versus starships. I mean, it's like this this movie. You've never seen anything like it except for the other two Avatar movies, but it's the weirdest kind of, like, I've watched Star Wars so many times and would happily watch it again. Almost any of the Star Wars movies, um, but Avatar, I think it was such a great experience, and I'm just not that interested in watching it again. I think it partly is the length of the movie. It's like 3.5 hours long. It's also, it's very immersive when you're in it, just taking in the visuals, the sound, the whole world that they've created. It's very immersive while you're in it, but it's then sort of maybe a little harder to revisit. I'm not sure, but I would say it's very solid storytelling, amazing visuals, unparalleled world building. It's this another one where I don't think that Avatar is the greatest movie of all time, but I would say that it is absolutely doing what it set out to do. And it's telling a good enough story with action and stakes and adventure and heart enough to make it worth it. And then just the world that James Cameron has created is just so impressive that it's an experience. So different from All About Eve, different from a lot of other great films that I love, but it's I would recommend going to see it in the theater. I honestly don't know if it would be worth seeing on like at home. I don't know if it would be worth watching.
Never done it.
As an experience, I would definitely recommend it.
I saw the first one in theaters when it came out, and I still remember that experience. Being like, "Wow, this is amazing!" And then I remember watching it, on somebody's TV a few months later or something, 6 months later, and just being like, "Oh, that's cool." But like, yeah, there's something about it where it's like I don't want to revisit it. I don't know why. I don't know if I have an answer for that. It's like I saw it, I enjoyed it, and it's like that's enough of that. Like that was the experience. I don't want anything more from that. Whereas Star Wars I'll watch, anytime anybody wants to watch it. So yeah, your the way that you said it as like a going to Six Flags or something. It's like, yeah, it's an event, like you make a day out of it, and then you go home and you go back to just reality, and you're not doing that anymore. It's like, do I want to ride this roller coaster again? Yeah, but only under certain specific conditions.
Right.
If it comes back in theaters, yeah, maybe I would do that, but I'm not going to watch this at home again. And that says nothing about it being a bad movie because I enjoyed it. It was a good story. I don't know. It's something weird. It's like its own thing, like you were saying. Something strange about it.
It is strange, and I honestly don't know what the economics of it are in terms of how much it makes in streaming or rentals.
Yeah,
But or the earlier two movies, what they made in that, but they make so much money in the box office that I think partially this is just James Cameron's vision, and it's just it's what he wants to do, and if it more than pays for itself, obviously, like that's great. But I think there's also something about rethinking the film going experience where people don't look at going to a movie theater as the default way to watch a movie anymore or to watch media.
true.
And so the they're much happier to watch something at home or on their phone. The saddest of all is watching something on the tiny little picture in picture on your phone while you do something else on your phone. It's like you're watching a full movie on something smaller than a postage stamp. But that absolutely happens. But I think Avatar is really saying there is still a kind of movie that people will come to the theater for, and so that's what I'm going to deliver. And it's a feature, not a bug, that it doesn't work on video.
Right. Yeah, and he's nailed it. I think it's very risky because you got to make it all up front, but yeah, he does time and time again.
So there you go, Dumb and Dumber, Avatar, Fire and Ash, both I think good movies, but also particular kinds of movies, and
Yes.
and so you know what you're getting into. But I think enjoyment can be had. And we'll be right back after this.
We've been asked to read some testimonials about Dunkin' and Bliss ice cream.
Oh, really? What are people saying?
Well, here's one from Margaret in Ohio. I ate Dunkin' and Bliss ice cream and then got promoted at work. Coincidence? I think not.
Wow. Here's another from Brad in Texas. Dunkin' and Bliss ice cream helped me parallel park for the first time. Now I believe anything is possible.
And Susan in Vermont. After trying Fat Boy Butterscotch, I can subtly understand what my dog is thinking. Turns out he loves watching Bachelor in Paradise.
And here's one from Mike in Florida. Dunkin' and Bliss ice cream gave me the confidence to call my ex-wife and tell her I'm doing just fine without her.
Way to go. And finally, from Jennifer in Oregon. I used to be lactose intolerant, but Dunkin' and Bliss ice cream convinced my digestive system to make an exception.
These testimonials are 100% real words spoken by us.
Dunkin' and Bliss ice cream. Are you ready to see what it can do for you?
And we are back.
All right, so that takes us into our movie of the week, and this week we are talking about All About Eve. This is the fourth in the Avatar series by James Cameron. Nope, nope, not quite. What can you tell us about All About Eve, Andrew?
All About Eve, 1950, directed by Joseph Mankiewicz. From the moment she glimpses her idol at the stage door, Eve Harrington is determined to take the reins of power away from the great actress Margot Channing. Eve maneuvers her way into Margot's Broadway role, becomes a sensation, and even causes turmoil in the lives of Margot's director boyfriend, her playwright, and his wife. Only the cynical drama critic sees through Eve, admiring her audacity and perfect pattern of deceit. And this is a story that it is all about Eve. She is the central figure to all of this. And I think of the movies we've watched so far, this is probably the most dialogue heavy and like dialogue driven movie. This whole movie is basically just people talking, and it's very clever, well written, and just driven by the dialogue of everything, which I really enjoyed. It's a very different experience to a lot of movies because you really have to pay attention. But when you do, it's very engaging, it's very fun, and you realize there's a lot of this tongue in cheek, kind of like saying one thing what they mean another. And I think that style is very hard to pull off, but but when done well, it's just really kind of amazing to watch and be like, wow, they really pulled this all together through almost nothing but words and great performances on those words. What did you think about the dialogue in this?
Yeah, I mean, I think the dialogue, it's of its time, which I think is, it flows well. It has a certain like theatricality to it, so it doesn't seem like perfectly naturalistic and certainly not how we would all
Yeah,
talk today. But I think it's a dialogue heavy. It's also shot in a very like standard coverage way, like the idea of coverage where you have a wide shot, close up of one person, close up of the other, and you have those three shots that you just cut between. Um, like that's basically the whole movie, which is kind of the standard for filmmaking, but a lot of movies branch out a little bit beyond that, especially more modern movies. But so that then is to me a little bit, it gives the visual feeling of a little bit static, that it's visually not as much happening, and so
yeah,
that then draws your attention into the dialogue. And I think so much of this is the characters and how they're sort of politicking and trying to get one over on the other one, but in a kind of passive aggressive or manipulative way, as opposed to
mhm,
big brawling fights or even shouting matches. If you compare this to like a Real Housewives episode, which in some ways, not to be reductive, but in some ways that's kind of the same kind of storyline. One woman trying to replace another woman um, and fighting it out. In the Real Housewives version, it would be lots of screaming and throwing glasses of wine at each other and all of that. And here it's a lot quieter, a lot more genteel, and that's how they approach this.
it's almost like if you weren't paying attention, you would have no idea what's going on or that anything is going on. This is not like a movie you can just passively watch and just like catch lines here and there. It's like it's almost subtle where you're like, wait, did she mean this? And then you really have to like think about it to really understand what's going on at any given moment.
Yeah, so if we're gonna get to eventually, remaking the film, but before that, if we are thinking about our reactions to it and thinking about what kind of things stood out to us about it for good or for ill, and leading into a discussion of does this really stand up as a great work of cinema? If that's sort of how we're framing this discussion, I'm thinking it's it's really interesting to me. We've seen a bunch of male heavy movies: The Godfather, Godfather Part Two, Pulp Fiction, which is a little bit more mixed. But um, what Did you feel like the like the female characters in All About Eve? Do you feel like it played in a specific way that wouldn't have worked with men? That was very specific to women? Could you do a gender swap on this? What did you think
Mm,
about that?
that's a good question. Because as I was watching, I was thinking, how the men are so much side characters in this story. Like it really is the world of women. And I guess it's not for me to say if this is an accurate representation of women. I would imagine not, since it's a movie. But there's something to this that I feel like you do need these two. Well, it's really a few really powerful performances by the female leads that are delivering what it's almost like what you're saying. It's almost like politics, but it is a lot of just behind the back maneuvering and a lot of just how you say it and when you say it. So I think like this is a perfectly cast movie in that sense that these women really deliver on the premise and how this plays out. I don't know that you could do it with the men leads. I don't think it would work in the same way because they're just such side characters in this whole thing.
Yeah, and apparently this got, and it's the only movie to ever do this, but it had four actresses get Academy Award nominations: two for Best Actress and two for Best Supporting Actress. So big, stacked cast, stacked, great performances, and great writing there. And I think there are very few films where there are even four major female roles that you could possibly get that kind of that where you even have like four female characters that with anywhere close
Right.
to enough role to get a nomination there. So I think that's really interesting that the movie did that. And there's a certain kind of like cattiness or a certain kind of trying to the younger woman trying to replace the older woman, and I feel like that does seem very gendered, and I think to some extent that's just a true reflection of life and society. I also wonder, like, does this movie shape kind of how those stories are told and what our expectations are for how actresses are going to deal with each other? But I guess I assume it's relatively true to how people might act, not in every circumstance, but that idea of being self-conscious about aging out of a role, someone newer and more attractive coming up, vying for power, vying for control. I think that probably is a relatively realistic look at life.
Yeah, and I feel like if you put men in the lead with the same idea behind it of like a younger man trying to take an older guy's position or place in society, it would probably be more physical, more of a I'm going to take him out. You would probably make this some type of a fight or a war movie or a battle. You would see this if it's a men focus. You'd see this in like a sport movie or like the younger player he's going to become the star player of whatever sport it is. Like it's be more of a physical environment, I feel. And so for this specifically, yeah, it does lends itself to the women being front and center of this whole movie. And I really enjoyed that, though. It was really fun.
What did you think about it? Sort of as a I mean, it wasn't a period piece when it came out. I think it was sort of set in the current day. But now
Yeah.
looking back on it so long ago, there were a few things stood out to me, but I like how big a deal being on Broadway was, and I
Yeah.
think I think partly you could make a movie about any sort of niche subject and make it have all the characters be people that really care about that subject. But I think this is reflecting a time when being a star on Broadway was like
Still
nationwide
matter.
famous. Like that was a huge deal to be a star on Broadway.
Yeah, I was almost wondering, like, are they playing this up for the movie or is this legitimately how it is at the time? I guess I don't know for sure, but I know it held more weight back then than it does now. And it's almost like they keep having this idea of like going out to Hollywood because they're in New York. This is where the real actors are. And then you go to Hollywood, but you got to come back because this is your home. And that's what everybody says, even if it's a platitude, because there's money in Hollywood. Uh, but that idea of that's it's just a different. It's like nowadays you would have to leave Hollywood and be like, I'm making it's just how I feel in my heart to go back to Broadway. And I know I'm not going to get the praise and the recognition I deserve. And it just was reversed back then. And it was just starting up. And I think you see one of the funny scenes I thought was, I don't know if this is Marilyn Monroe's first movie or whatever, but she's a side character in this movie and she shows up as this, I think, a Hollywood type person or somebody who wants to get into Hollywood. You're like, oh yeah. Like she has funny lines. She comes in, you're like, this is the person that I think represents in this movie what Hollywood is.
Mm-hmm.
And then you have these other actresses who seem more serious and like dedicated to their craft. And I think that was intentional as a way. I don't know if this movie's necessarily taking the stand, but the story is saying, Broadway theater, this is it. And then Hollywood is this other thing, but also a little tongue in cheek because this movie itself is Hollywood, right? The
Yeah.
actresses are pretending they're not in Hollywood to play this movie. So I think it works on multiple levels, and it's kind of, I know it understands that's what it's doing, but it's fun to see that played out that way.
I wonder, do you think that we are at a time now where Hollywood is in that, like, where things have shifted even again? And so, like, the Hollywood stars are now like the Broadway stars of before, but like, we're moving into an era where influencers are the new, and social
Oh
media
yeah,
is the new world. And so in years to come, right now, the Hollywood stars are still the big ones. Broadway stars, if they're only on Broadway, I don't think the general public knows who they are.
aware, yeah,
But Hollywood stars might do social media influencing stuff. You got Gwyneth Paltrow, you got different people like dipping their toes in, but it's not looked at as legitimate in the same way.
that's
But
true.
I wonder if I think that's a good analogy for how it is then, and I wonder if we're going to shift ever more to like it's not that big a deal to be in the movies; it's a big deal to be on TikTok and Instagram.
That's a really interesting idea because you could almost redo this movie in a modern day and have it be set like that. That would be really funny. That's almost a remake idea. But I do think so. This is having some experience with this past fall. My family decided they wanted to watch Dancing with the Stars. Have you heard of this show?
Uh huh.
It's a really big show. And like the stars on it, they always have actresses, but like the biggest people on the show are just social media influencing
Oh,
people or people who have a podcast or whatever. Like they would like say this is what they're famous for, and it'd be some acting role, and you're like, oh, whatever. But it's like, oh, this person from TikTok, and you're like, I have no idea who that is, but they are the biggest one, and they're getting all the votes. So I do think there's something to that of like being outside of Hollywood, a star on social media somehow is like the next wave. And these people have real followings and real clout. And they, in a sense, I think in a certain way, they're being followed by more people than many actors and actresses. They're just not in that industry. And they're being kept out, or, maybe not kept out, but it's hard to get in to Hollywood in that way. You can't just walk up and get in. And I think they're showing they don't need to, there's another way.
yeah. I mean, and I think like in the '90s, there was this big run of independent films, and the thinking was, you had Quentin Tarantino, uh, you had Steven Soderbergh and Kevin Smith and Spike Lee coming up, varying degrees of independent versus with the studio system. But you had a bunch of people coming up, Robert Rodriguez, who came out of nowhere. And there was a sense that, like, this was so fresh and new because you didn't need to be approved by the industry. You could just do this on your own. In reality, you needed to get a lot of industry to agree that you were worth like promoting, because if Robert Rodriguez made El Mariachi and no one in the industry decided it was worth anything, the public wouldn't have seen it. So like
Right.
at some point, it wasn't just that anybody could just push through, but it felt like people were coming up out of nowhere. And I think there's a certain similar feeling with social media now, that it feels like people can come up out of nowhere. And some people, I mean, absolutely can, and they could just over years build up an audience and really from nothing become a social media personality. Some people have a little bit more of a concerted push and capital behind them. But I think that is always very exciting. The idea of something new is coming out that isn't just what the bigwigs approved. It's people making it on their own and bringing it to you. And I think in many ways, the spirit of Kevin Smith and Robert Rodriguez is on TikTok today. And I say that as someone who doesn't watch anything on TikTok, but I feel like that's sort of where a lot of the energy is.
Yeah. All the new stuff you want to watch, and it's so much more accessible too. I think that really matters, the accessibility of it all. It's almost like when you had Broadway, if you're not in New York, you're not seeing it, right? So then you go to Hollywood and these movies are being shown to everybody worldwide, and everybody, if you go to a theater. And now it's like I have to go to a theater to watch a movie, or I have to go to a streaming service and I have to pay a subscription fee, somehow pay money to see this. Whereas TikTok, Instagram, that's just free. You just open it up on your phone anywhere, anytime, and it's there. And so it's like a different level of accessibility, and that's going to change what people watch and who they're drawn to and interested in.
I also noticed, and this is very tangential as well, there's a moment when they get out of an elevator and there's clearly an elevator attendant manning the door and the buttons. And I just thought that is also where we're at with cars these days, because for years, like the elevator does not need a person running it. But for decades, people didn't feel safe with the idea that the machine was somehow safe enough. And so they wanted there to be a person running it so they could just put their faith in that person and not have to put their faith in the elevator machine. And so for decades, that was a job to be an elevator attendant. And now that just seems ridiculous, because how hard is it to push a button? But I think that's where we're getting to with cars, that we like the self-driving is here / just around the corner. And we have a lot of things that like we don't want to give it our full faith yet. And so, the driver needs to be there, and they don't need to be driving, but they need to be attentive. And I think pretty soon the machines are just going to take over.
The machines are going to take over. And there's lots of jokes around that. One of my favorites was, I can't remember the comedian. He's like, when you go to a store and they have the sliding doors that are, automatic sliding doors, it's like, that's a machine doing that. It's like, ask yourself, would you rather have a 16-year-old kid with a rope and a pulley system opening and shutting that door as people come and go? It's like, obviously, no, you would rather have the technology. It's like, this technology is just going to be better than people at some point. Like, you don't want teenagers or just some unqualified person just doing this. It's like when we watched The Apartment, like the main character woman of that movie was an operator attendee. Like that was her job, and so it's a lot of these things go out of style over time. But it definitely sets the period of like, this was the 1950s, and it was very different, because that was 76 years ago. And that is a good amount of time for things to have changed.
So with the actual story of All About Eve, how do you feel like that holds up time-wise? I mean, we've talked about a few little quirks of society that are very different, but in terms of the story, do you think that's of the time, or do you think that's kind of a universal story that works now just as well?
I really felt like it was a universal story, and I was very impressed with the story in general. Just how they connected the dots, how it came full circle. I think that ending of this movie is one of the great endings in a movie, and they just like, it was a great movie, and they have that ending that they throw in there, and you're just like, oh yeah, like this is the perfect way to tie up this knot, because there's always going to be the star and the person who wants to be the star, and then the whole movie is watching as Eve slowly takes over the star's life, Margot's life, and just infiltrates everything and becomes the star. And at the end of the movie, you're like, okay, she burned a lot of bridges, made a lot of enemies, but she made it. And then at the end, she's like, well, she's not happy. It's the exact scene mirroring the opening scene where Eve goes to see the star Margot in her dressing room. And now it's Eve in her dressing room in a penthouse with some other wide-eyed young girl who wants to be her, doing the same thing to her that she just did to get to where she is. And it's this full circle moment. And you're like, yeah, this is just an ongoing thing that just goes forever and ever as people search after what they want, and there's this great line where, she has the award and she's like, well, just put this award where your heart should be. And, it's like, it's a funny, quick witted line, but the idea of, you do all this stuff to get this award or to get this promotion, this place in society, and then you're still not happy. And then somebody else comes and tries to take it too. And I think that's a universal theme that could be any time period. What do you think?
Yeah, I mean, this almost seems like a Greek myth level of just like storytelling
Yeah.
it just seems like an archetype. And in terms of that kind of younger, I think what's a little bit different and what I think makes the movie really strong is that it's beyond just an archetype of younger person trying to replace the older person. I think Betty Davis as Margot has like an edge to her that
Yeah.
she's not just passively getting replaced. I think she has a
Right.
very strong performance, and then that makes it so you, you identify more with her. But also, I think she's a little abrasive, and Eve seems kind of sweet, and so that makes you then want to sympathize with Eve a little more. And I think that interplay, I think the specifics of how the characters act and react with each other and play one another off of each other, and including the supporting actors, I think all of that just works really well in a kind of a timeless kind of interpersonal relationship kind of way. I don't think that that's that different today than it was then, or than it was 100 years before then. I think that's the same kind of just the way that people deal with each other.
And the way the movie presents that story, I think, is really well done. And part of the reason this movie holds up, even though it's a very different time period, is as you watch this movie, you see Eve, and it's like she is presented as this one who's the outsider in a way, and she's this genuine, sweet person. But throughout the whole movie, everything she says is a lie. Everything she says is manipulation in some degree, and you can't believe anything, even though it's presented that way. And then you have Margot, and she's the one that's in the system. She's the star, and she's presented as if she's fake, as if she's not a real person. But everything she says are her real emotions. She's being honest at all times in this movie about how she feels and what's going on. And it's almost like this, the way they're presented is the opposite of reality. And they also show the other they show that everything is almost like behind the scenes. You never see anybody perform. They always talk about their performance that just happened and how great it was or how great they are at performing. You never see that. You always see like, this is on the stage, but there's no audience, or this is behind the curtain. And so it's giving this illusion of you're seeing behind the scenes. You're not seeing the movie, you're seeing the movie behind the movie, even though what you're watching is a movie that's presented in a very specific way to make you feel certain ways. But I think that the doing it that way helps you get more involved or feel more like you feel the system better. Like you understand what it's like to be in this system a little more than if it was presented in a different way. So I think it's a very smart, clever way to do it that way. And I'm sure there was a conscious choice by them, by Mankiewicz, to like deliver it that way, to show it that way. But I think it works really well because it's the subtle differences, the dichotomy of the two, that even if you don't realize that's what's going on, you're noticing it just by the way it's framed and presented.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think that's a really good point. Um, do you think that this film holds up as one of the great films of all time? Uh, do, would you
That's,
recommend it to people? I guess those are
yeah,
two different questions.
that's a good question because this is considered one of the great films of all time. It's very highly rated on almost any place you see where movies are rated. It won some Academy Awards, nominated for a lot. Um, I understand why it would be that way. I think it is a great movie. I think the performances are outstanding. I think it's a timeless story. I do think it is a little of its time in the way that, the way that the actors perform the dialogue, the way that it is filmed and directed. I think it feels a little outdated to me. And I found that I had a harder time watching it because of that. I feel like if you updated it, it would have been a little easier watch. But I understand like why it is so well received and so well thought of. I like it makes sense. I think this is an all-time great movie. Um, Maybe a little harder because it is 75 years old. What did you think?
Yeah, I agree with all that. I think that it's a great movie. I think maybe women would like it better in the sense that it's so full of strong female performances, and
Mhm.
I can acknowledge and appreciate that, but I think if that was of particular resonance to you, that might make it an even more interesting watch. I think as a story, it almost suffers from its own success in terms of I feel like the basic ideas of it have been copied so much. I'm not sure that it invented the idea of young person replacing older person, but
Mhm.
like the I feel like there hasn't really been a direct remake of it per se, but I
Yeah.
feel like a lot of the ideas behind it we've seen in so many other works that it doesn't have like the shock like, oh, what a rich story that I never saw it going that way. And that's in part just because it's had such an impact that it's a little harder for it to stand on its own. And I do think visually it's kind of static. Dialogue wise, it's a little bit theatrical, and those aren't negative, but I don't know that that's what a modern audience is looking for in films.
Yeah. Yeah, I agree with that. I think if you remade this, I guess they haven't. I was thinking about the themes in this. It kind of reminded me of this movie that came out recently called May December. It's
Oh
not the same
yeah.
story, but it's like a woman who gets really close to another woman and tries to like take over her life a little bit. It's like, oh, that's like it is somewhere in that vein of like, you know, that type of a story, which I think has been done a lot. Like you said, like we've seen this, we know like the surprise ending isn't a surprise to us anymore. Maybe it was back then though.
Right. Yeah, there was another movie called Saltburn, which did do sort of a gender swap, which was an interesting one. Um, I also think of I don't know that too many people make this comparison, but I do think that there's a Braveheart. Not the
Okay.
entirety. I would say that Braveheart in general is a remake of All About Eve, but I do think that there's an interesting just what you were saying about Margot and Eve. I do think that Robert the Bruce's father, who's in a castle, walled up in a castle cell with leprosy, when
Hmm.
he's talking to his son Robert the Bruce, there's this interesting dynamic there of the father seems like the bad guy. Robert the Bruce seems like the nicer, more genuine guy. But the father is the one, everything he says is correct. And Robert the
Yeah,
Bruce is the faker who's like the faker traitor who keeps messing things up. And I feel like there's an interesting similarity there.
that's
More
true.
people should make note of this, but that comparison between Margot is Robert the Bruce's father and Eve is Robert the Bruce. It's a perfect analogy.
I think that actually that actually is pretty good. Maybe not the rest of the story of that movie, but those two particular characters, yeah. You put
I
those That's interesting. You put those two characters in any movie and it's going to work. That type of a
th-
dynamic.
there are fewer horses killed with spears in All About Eve. I'm not sure none, but fewer.
Fewer we know of.
But yeah, all right. But so this brings us to the remaking. So if somebody came to us and said, "You need to remake this film, All About Eve, but we want it to be a family film," how would you approach that?
I think you could argue this is a family film if you wanted to. I don't think it has enough going for kids to be interested in this at all. I think it'd be a tough watch for anybody younger than, even high school and younger. I think this would be a hard watch. If you wanted to have a family, like this is going to be for the entire family, I almost think you would go like Disney Channel original movie style on this, and maybe like a High School Musical type thing, where you center it around teenagers in school. Somebody else, one of the teenagers is either the star player or the star performer, and it's another one that's coming up, and add some songs, add some music numbers, and add some more comedy, like, dialogue a little more for families. I think the story would work. I think that's right in the alley of what you could see as a family movie. That idea. But yeah, what do you think?
Yeah, I think that's where I was going with this as well. And I think there is a character introduced at the end named Phoebe,
Yep.
who I feel like if you were doing this as a family movie, I think a big question is it because this movie, it's during the Hays Code. It's not full of violence and sexual content. So, like in that sense, it could be a family movie. But in terms of, is this a movie that A, kids would want to watch, and B, like teaching some kind of uplifting message, which you generally want with a what you would consider a family movie. I'm not sure that All About Eve is teaching an uplifting message. I feel
No.
like there's something to be said for if it is like a High School Musical. I think the best message would be, okay, so Eve replaces Margot. I mean, some would have Eve replaces Margot, then Phoebe comes in, and Eve and Margot now have a newfound friendship because they've both been replaced. So there's
Right.
something that you could have there, or you could be even more family friendly and say, Eve replaces Margot, but you know what? Now the senior play has been done, and they just go back to being students, and it turns out life is bigger than that senior class play.
I mean, that is kind of the story of High School Musical. Maybe that's what High School Musical was based on, and we didn't even realize this. There could have been some the story based on All About Eve. You
Well,
know,
apparently, speaking of family films, the movie Showgirls, which I've never seen, it came out probably when I was in my teens, and it was like famous for being like the first movie and maybe only movie rated NC-17 that was being released in major like theaters.
oh
And
really?
I never saw it. I think I wasn't allowed to see it at the time, and then everything that I heard about it was that it just wasn't very good, so I didn't revisit it later. But apparently, it is largely a sort of story remake of All About Eve, but set in the like
Oh,
Las Vegas strip club scenery.
yeah. See, the story just has the potential to be put into any situation and have it work. It's just a great story.
So there you go. So you could do the family version, High School Musical. You could do the Showgirls version, and
If you
I
want to go
still
all
think
in.
the Braveheart version could also work, but probably not for children.
No.
But now, if we needed to do it for no money, how would we approach that? A no budget remake of this?
Yeah, I was thinking, I mean, there's obviously not a lot of, I don't know how big the set was for this, but if you cut down on the characters, I do feel like this could still work. If you just had the, I don't know, maybe the main four characters and you kept them in a room or a couple rooms, and or like a house that they leave and go back to. Like, you could really cut this down to minimal locations because it is so dialogue heavy, and you could cut out a few of these characters and still have the main theme, the main message of this story work with just there's one person overtaking the other one and maybe a few other side characters. But I think you could really cut down on this and shorten it up, make it a few locations, and still have almost the same story take place and have it still work, although it wouldn't be as good, I don't think. But yeah, what do you think?
I thought that this seemed so obviously like a low budget film. I mean, I think it was not particularly low budget for the time, but I think that style of filmmaking can be done on such a low budget that
Mhm.
it it it, it didn't seem like that would make that much of a difference to me. So I was thinking about it. What if you did it with a huge budget? What would you get from that? And I
Mm.
don't think you'd get that much. But I was thinking of I thought of the Fifth Element and how
Oh,
you have this
great one.
giant sort of sci-fi world, and I think of the Chris Tucker character in all his giant hairdo and outfit. I'm like, that would be pretty interesting if we saw this all about Eve's story, but it was taking place in some kind of science fiction world where this performance was happening.
That's funny.
That could be interesting.
And I would almost even go back to make some big musical numbers out of this. I feel like it's right there. You throw in some big musical numbers, some huge performances, great set pieces, make it in space. Yeah.
Yeah, I don't think that there's anything. It's an interesting choice that the film did of not showing them actually acting. And I don't know if that was because they didn't want on a production level to have to do that, or if, I mean, but that seemed probably not, because it was a serious movie. They could have done that if they wanted to, but probably I mean, I wonder if there's an element of like they didn't want the audience to be making a judgment about how good they were as actors.
Yeah.
And so we just want you to accept, here's the behind the scenes of how they're going about getting these roles. We don't want to give you the information to make a judgment about who's better at it.
Right.
And that's an intentional choice. Not necessarily always the best choice, but that was an interesting choice.
Well, I think it works in this movie because the whole movie's based on what people are saying about things. And it's all just based on somebody's opinion or whose word's going to win in the end. And that's all it is. So I like that they did that for this specific movie.
So if you were going to do your giant science fiction musical numbers, would that be like their performances, or would that just be, we're going to break into song in the scenes that we have in the movie?
Right. Yeah, I would do it that way. Well, the scenes that they have currently in the movie, they're lamenting the loss of their fame, or she does some, really intense number about how she's coming after her and she's going to get her a job. I think that could work. And I mean, because in the movie, these performances were all nominated for Academy Awards. So they are all great actors, but they're it's an actor pretending to be a different actor. So It's like 2 layers deep on that. What would you do?
Yeah, I mean, I think different movies approach this differently, but I think the fact that they didn't want to show them acting, I'll stick with that, and I'll just have the musical numbers, just break into song, and we'll go from there. Now, what about the TV version, 10-part Netflix series, ongoing sitcom? What would you do with that?
I feel like if this idea was pitched today, Netflix would be like, okay, give us 6 to 10 episodes of this and make it a drama, and we're going to really play this out. And I think that would be right up the alley of what it would work for this type of a story, because you could do more with it. You could expand on a lot of these scenes, or there's some time that we aren't shown, the time between her rise and fall. I mean, that could go on a lot longer, and just the slow build to it. So I think you get 2 really powerhouse actresses to do this, and you've got like a mini series or something that's going to win awards. I think it's very strong. What do you think?
It's interesting thinking of like the story that we see here. Well, I don't know. I'm thinking of a few other films that have been kind of like this. There was The Substance just last year with Demi Moore and Margot Qualley, I think is her name.
Yep.
And that was sort of a similar idea, but it had to introduce this whole science fiction aspect to it. There was Tar a few years ago with Cate Blanchett. That wasn't quite the same idea of like one person replacing her, but it was kind of her being undone by kind of Me Too, or like reverse Me Too. Anyway, kind of like just sort of being taken down, but some similar ideas of like the established, accomplished person being taken down one way or another. Some similarities there. I think that I think that you need a little bit more than just young person replacing older person in any kind of show. Like, I think like the family version I think would work because you're doing the High School Musical version. I think like that would work for young people. But I think if you wanted to make this seriously interesting for adults today, you need a little bit more than just a new person replacing older person. And so then that's been the approach some of those other movies took. I think an interesting thing would be just sticking with the story that we have from the movie, but Eve and her story that we hear about, it would be really interesting to see some of that. And
Her backstory.
um like her backstory, and also, I mean, we know that the story that she is telling is not true. We hear a version, like we hear someone tell what her actual story is. I'm not sure we know for sure that that's true either.
Right.
So it's, I mean, she doesn't really refute it, I don't think, or concretely refute it, but it's there. I think there's something really interesting that could be done here with what is the truth of Eve. If you're going to make a TV show all about Eve, and a big part of it is that she is lying about who she is, and she has this like a complicated past, but also full of lies and deception in her past. I think you could explore that. Like, I don't know if it's a mixture of what's happening presently as she's trying to take over for Margot while flashing back to earlier times, or if we have
Mhm.
whole other episodes where we're seeing, like, maybe we're cutting between her past life and her current life. But to me, there's an untapped aspect of the story that I think would be more interesting to a modern day audience, of who was Eve before she got here. I think that's what I would want to explore.
Yeah, really go deep into her character and figure it out, and then watch as she lies in the present day, and then see who she was before. Yeah, that'd be an interesting way to go about it. That could work.
It would also be interesting if, like, you didn't call it All About Eve. You didn't tell people it was a remake of All About Eve. You
You just did it.
start off and it's her journey to success, but you realize midway through the series that she's now lying about everything and recreating, and she's out to, she's going to be cutthroat, but we've gained sympathy for her as she's gone through these different hardships and different experiences getting to that point. I mean, there's a lot that you could play with depending on when you reveal which information.
Yeah, yeah. There is a lot of depth to this story that you could reveal at any moment you want. So there's a lot of different ways you could go with that, because it's pretty rich, a story, and especially if you included those side characters and gave their backstory, or what are they doing um, when she's not around, things like that.
So, would any of those be an improvement on the film?
I don't know. I don't know that any of those would be an improvement. I think there's potential there, just because this story is such a good story that if it was done in another way, it has the potential to just reach audiences and be amazing. I would like to see like an updated version of Hollywood versus social media star. I think that'd be a fun thing to see. Um, but as it stands, this is a great classic movie. I wouldn't change anything about this movie as is. If anything, I want more of this story. Maybe set in a modern age. That'd be fun.
Yeah, I think it's a great film. I think it's worth seeing. I do think that it's stylistically quite different from the kind of movies that people watch now. And so, even if you don't want to radically remake it, I do think it's going to be a little bit of a tough sell to some people,
Mm.
because it is sort of subtle, and and it is a little dated in some of the ways that the story or the story is presented.
Yeah.
So I'd love to see I think the High School Musical version actually would do really well, and I think a little bit that's kind of like Mean Girls is another one where there's a certain
I was
element
thinking.
of this in there.
Yeah.
Um, and I mean, there's so many movies. Like, it kind of doesn't make sense to remake it, because I think a lot of movies have stolen so much from it that
Yeah.
it's kind of been remade 30 times, but not just one for one remade.
Right. Yeah. We've all seen this in different forms already, but this was the original, and that stands for something. I mean, to create something that just revolutionized the world after it came out, that's quite something to do.
Yep, absolutely. Okay, All About Eve. Great film, worth seeing. Little dated, go into it knowing that, but I think definitely worth seeing to
Hmm.
expand your understanding of film history. And great female acting performances. I mean, good
Yes.
acting all around, but I think those four nominations for actresses and really strong female characters, which is just a little rarer in film to see. So I think it's a good one to see for that reason alone. But that'd be my thought on All About Eve. And there we have it. Thanks for joining us for this episode of How to Make Films and Influence People. Check us out at howtomakefilmspodcast.com, and we'll see you next time.